were already saying everything for us. His fingers slowly traced my palm, leaving slight goosebumps. And this movement seemed infinitely gentle. I looked up and noticed how he was looking at me, calmly, confidently, with that warmth that melted all the resistance inside. "You understand," he said quietly, almost in a whisper, "that now everything will not be the same." I nodded, unable to say a word. My chest was so tight with emotion that any unnecessary movement could betray everything I was trying to hide. He leaned a little closer. His shoulder almost touched mine. "And I like it," he added. And a soft smile flashed at the corners of his lips. I also smiled, albeit embarrassed, but at that second I felt an incredible relief. I no longer needed to pretend, to hide behind my usual mask. We sat side by side, holding hands, and that was enough to understand. We had taken a step from which we were not going to retreat. He slightly squeezed my hand more tightly, as if confirming what had just been said. His palm was warm and reliable, and in this simple touch I felt more confidence than in any words. "It's important to me that you didn't turn away," he said quietly, almost confidentially. "I see it in your eyes." I involuntarily smiled, although my cheeks were already burning. It seemed to me that this moment was too fragile and any wrong word could destroy everything. But he held the atmosphere confidently and gently, as if he knew what to do. He leaned a little closer. His voice became lower. "Don't run away from this. We both know that this is right." I took a deep breath and finally allowed myself to relax. There was no pressure in his words, only a calm acceptance that I wanted to cling to. I looked up, and he met my gaze with that same sincerity that made me feel warm inside. That evening, for the first time, I understood that simple intimacy can be stronger than any confession. He was in no hurry to let go of my hand. On the contrary, his fingers intertwined with mine even more tightly, and I felt that this gesture had become something more than an accidental touch. His eyes remained fixed on mine. There was no doubt in them, only a quiet confidence. "See," he said softly, "you don't have to say anything. I can read everything in your gaze anyway." My heart skipped a beat, and I smiled a little, feeling the warmth spreading through my skin. I didn't know how to react correctly, but I no longer wanted to hide anything. He leaned a little closer, and his voice became even quieter. "The main thing is that you're nearby, and that you're not turning away." I nodded, unable to answer with words. At that moment, time seemed to stand still. The simple kitchen, the silence around us, and our hands intertwined on the table became a symbol of something new and very important. And I understood that there was no turning back, and I didn't want to look for it. He gently ran his thumb over my palm, as if checking how far he could allow himself to go with this gesture. His touch was cautious, but at the same time confident, and a shiver ran down my spine. "You have no idea," he said a little lower than usual, "how long I've been waiting for this moment." I looked up, and for a moment our gazes intertwined so tightly that it became difficult for me to breathe. There was no pressure or game in his eyes, only sincerity and quiet strength. "And I..." My voice broke and I fell silent, unable to find the words. He smiled gently, understanding without explanation. "You don't have to say anything," he said. "Your eyes have long since said everything for you." It became so warm in my chest, as if the whole house was filled with this feeling. His fingers didn't let go of my hand, and I suddenly understood that it is in such moments that true intimacy is born, quiet, without unnecessary words, but as strong as a promise. He pulled my hand a little closer to him. His fingers clasped my palm more tightly, and there was such confidence in this simple movement that I could no longer resist. His gaze held me warm and calm, but at the same time too direct for me to look away. "Now everything has changed," he said out loud, and the corners of his lips trembled in a slight smile. "And I won't let us lose this." I felt my cheeks flush, but inside there was an amazing calmness, as if this was exactly what I had been waiting for, even if I was afraid to admit it to myself. We sat in silence with our hands intertwined, and it seemed that the whole world had disappeared. At that moment I understood that no more words were needed. Everything had already been said by our gazes and this simple touch that had become the beginning of something new. She thought their relationship would be peaceful, but a warm flirtation began to slip into the routine. Stay with me, because this is a story about a girl who gradually discovered a new side to her relationship with her stepfather. My name is Marina, and I'm used to our quiet house. We lived a calm, measured life, each of us busy with our own things. But I started to notice more and more how his gaze changed when we were alone. There was nothing rough about it, just a softness and attention that both embarrassed and warmed me at the same time. One evening I went to the kitchen for a cup of tea. He was already sitting there, reading a newspaper, and looked up when I came in. His smile was warm, simple, but there was something special about it that made my heart beat faster. "It's late for tea," he remarked, shaking his head slightly. "And you're not sleeping either?" I replied with a smile, trying to hide my slight nervousness. He put down the newspaper, folded his hands on the table, and looked at me more intently. Sometimes it's just nice to sit in silence, especially with good company nearby. These words were quiet, but they touched something inside me. On a most ordinary evening, I suddenly felt that an invisible thread had appeared between us, and I no longer wanted to turn away from it. "Do you want me to continue?" In the same gentle, romantic style. I smiled to hide my embarrassment and poured myself some tea. Hot steam rose, and I caught myself purposely getting busy with small things, just so I wouldn't show how much I felt his gaze. He leaned back slightly in his chair, continuing to watch me. There was no pressure or harshness in it, only calmness. But that made it even harder to remain indifferent. "You run around the house too fast," he said softly with a slight smile. "Always in a hurry somewhere." I laughed quietly. "And you notice everything?" "Yes, of course," he replied seriously. "I can't help but notice you." This simple phrase sounded so warm that the tea in my hands felt unnecessary. I looked up and met his gaze. There was nothing random in it, only a gentle confidence and care that made my heart beat faster. And at that moment I understood that a simple conversation at the kitchen table was no longer ordinary. I took a small sip of tea to hide the tremor in my voice, but even the cup in my hands didn't help. His gaze was too attentive, as if he could see all my thoughts. He leaned forward slightly, resting his elbow on the table, and said quietly, "You know, you don't have to be strong all the time. You can just sit here without having to prove anything." I lowered my eyes, smiling to hide my embarrassment. "With you, for some reason, that sounds too easy." He was silent for a second and then replied gently, "Because I want it to be easy for you with me." These words sounded so sincere that I felt warmth spreading through my body. His voice was calm, but there was a special strength in it, the kind that gave me a feeling of security. I quickly looked at him again and our eyes met. And even though nothing was said aloud, I already knew that the same fine line had appeared between us, which we both felt but were afraid to name. I put the cup on the table, afraid of dropping it from the slight tremor in my hands. He noticed this movement and smiled a little, but there was no mockery in his smile, only calm approval, as if he understood me better than I understood myself. "That's it," he said quietly. "You've finally stopped hiding behind the small things." I sighed and tried to pretend that this was an ordinary conversation, but my voice treacherously trembled. "You have a way of making a person feel awkward." He tilted his head slightly. His eyes flashed with a soft spark. "Maybe, but only when I want a person to stop being afraid to be real." These words touched me deeper than I expected. It became difficult for me to breathe, and I lowered my gaze, but I felt the warmth of his presence filling the entire kitchen. He slowly moved his hand closer, placing it on the table next to mine. Not touching, but so close that I felt an invisible tension between our fingers. And at that moment I realized, the light flirtation was no longer a game. It was becoming an acknowledgement without words. My breathing deepened. I felt my heart beating too loudly in this silence. His palm remained next to mine, and I clearly understood that just the slightest movement was enough for our fingers to touch. He leaned forward a little. His voice sounded soft, almost a whisper. You feel it too, don't you? I looked up and froze. His gaze was neither demanding nor insistent, but calm and warm, but that was what confused me the most. I couldn't find the words, only gave a barely noticeable nod. The corners of his lips trembled in a slight smile, and he finally let his fingers touch mine. The touch was so careful, as if he was afraid of scaring the moment away, but it was stronger than any confession. That's all, he said quietly. Nothing more is needed. I understood. The simple touch of a hand had become the very step for both of us after which it was impossible to return to the way things were. His fingers lay on top of mine, and this gesture was so simple, but there was a confidence in it that made me tremble all over. He gently squeezed my palm, as if checking to see if I would pull away. But I didn't move. On the contrary, I allowed this touch to remain. The silence became almost deafening, and every moment seemed longer than usual. I cautiously looked up and our eyes met again. In his eyes was the same calmness that always gave me a feeling of security, but now something new was mixed in. A soft, warm tenderness. That's it, he said quietly. Just trust it. I felt the corners of my lips tremble in a slight embarrassed smile. It seemed to me that the whole world had shrunk to this table, his hands and my gaze. And at that moment I understood this was not an impulse, not a coincidence. This was the quiet intimacy that was born not of words, but of small gestures, and it was that made everything so special. He intertwined his fingers a little tighter, and this gesture seemed to confirm everything that was already floating between us. His hand was warm and reliable, and inside me, a calmness mixed with a slight excitement was spreading. You have no idea, he said quietly, how much this moment means to me. I felt my cheeks blush and lowered my gaze to our hands. It looked so natural, as if they were always meant to be together. He gently touched my palm with his thumb, as if drawing invisible lines on it. This simple gesture was more gentle than any word. I don't want to rush, he continued. His voice was calm, almost a whisper. It's enough for me to know that you are close and that you have allowed me to be closer. I looked up and met his gaze. There was no doubt there, only warm confidence. And at that second I realized, everything that began as a light flirtation had become a quiet, but very real intimacy, which I no longer wanted to give up. He leaned a little closer, not letting go of my hands, and I caught his breath even in calm, but there was a special warmth in it. His gaze was so direct and attentive that I couldn't hide as I had before. You know, he said softly, sometimes it's enough just to be silent together to understand each other. I nodded, feeling my throat catch with the emotions that flooded me. We were indeed silent, but this silence was filled. It seemed to say more than any words. He slightly covered my other hand with his, clasping it completely. This movement was slow, cautious, but it had a sense of strength and reliability, as if he wanted to show, here and now you are safe. I allowed myself to smile, quietly, almost imperceptibly, but he immediately caught it. His lips trembled in response, and I understood that this was our common little secret, which was already impossible to ignore. He was in no hurry to let go of my hand. On the contrary, his fingers seemed to wrap around my palm more tightly, as if he was afraid of destroying the fragile moment. I felt the warmth of his skin, and because of it, my heart was beating as if it was about to burst out. I like seeing you like this, he said quietly, not taking his eyes off me. Real, without a mask, without unnecessary words. I tried to say something, but my voice treacherously trembled, and in the end, only a barely audible whisper came out. You say things in a way that I have nothing to object to. He smiled softly, leaning a little closer. There was no pressure in his eyes, only care and that quiet warmth from which everything inside me melted. And you don't have to, he said calmly. It's enough that you're near. I took a deep breath, allowing these words to pass through me. At that moment I understood our relationship was no longer just formal. Something new, barely perceptible, but incredibly important had appeared in them. I lowered my gaze to our hands, intertwined so naturally, as if they had always belonged to each other. His fingers moved slightly, barely perceptibly stroking my palm. And from this simple movement, goosebumps ran through my body. "You're looking down," he said quietly, with a slight smile in his voice. "And I want you to look only at me." I slowly looked up, and there was nothing random in his gaze. It was warm, almost enveloping, and at the same time firm, as if he wanted me to believe every word he said. "That's it," he said when our eyes met. "This is exactly how I want to see you." My breathing became uneven, and I felt myself blushing, but I couldn't look away. It was like a confession without words, that same invisible boundary that we both had already crossed, but were afraid to voice. And at that moment I understood, our quiet evenings would never be the same again. He leaned a little closer. His face was very close, and I felt the air between us become hot, as if the silence in the kitchen itself was filled with tension. His voice sounded low and soft, almost a whisper. "You have no idea how much everything changes when you're nearby." My heart was beating so fast that I could barely breathe. I tried to smile to hide my embarrassment, but he immediately noticed the trembling on my lips and without looking away, squeezed my hand a little tighter. "Don't hide," he continued. "It's important to me to see the real you." I nodded, although the words were stuck in my throat. His eyes held me captive, and there was no shadow of a game in that gaze. There was a sincerity there that made me want to trust him completely. I felt the resistance in me melt away and realized that his attention no longer seemed accidental. It had become a quiet acknowledgement that could no longer be ignored. He leaned a little closer, and now I could feel his breath on my cheek. His gaze was warm and persistent at the same time. There was no doubt in it, only a gentle confidence. "You do understand," he said slowly, as if every word had weight, "that all of this is not by chance." I swallowed with difficulty. My heart was beating so hard that it seemed he could hear its rhythm too. I wanted to say something, but my voice would not obey me. I just nodded slightly, and that was enough. His fingers intertwined more tightly with mine, and he didn't take his eyes off me. "That's good," he said, barely audibly. "Your silence is enough for me. It speaks louder than words." I allowed myself to relax in this moment to change my perspective. There was that same silence around us when explanations are needed. And I clearly understood, now there is a connection between us that we both no longer want to break. He leaned back a little but didn't let go of my hand. On the contrary, his fingers clasped my palm even more gently, as if he wanted to make it clear. "I'm here, I won't let go." His eyes remained fixed on me, calm, confident, and because of this, a strange warmth spread through my body. "You know," he said quietly, "I've wanted to say this for a long time, but I was afraid you'd turn away." I felt my breath catch and whispered barely audibly, "And I was afraid to hear it." A barely noticeable smile appeared on his face, but not a light, familiar one, but a deep, almost serious one. He leaned closer, and there was no shadow of a game in his voice. "Now we have nothing to fear." And at that moment I understood. Everything that began with simple attention and light flirtation had become something much more. We were both silent, but our hands, intertwined on the table,